And that's what the positively focused practice is all about. Creating an internal state of unshakable, sovereign goodness, positivity, freedom, joy-seeking energy within you. And then as you maintain that chronically, your physical reality has to reflect that back to you. Today, let's talk about being wrong. Being wrong gets all of us into all kinds of trouble. It doesn't matter if you're in a work relationship or a personal relationship, or even just meeting someone on the street or driving on the road. Being wrong is going to get you into lots of trouble. And in the AI world, where we're going to have more autonomy, more freedom, and more sovereignty, we must be aware of this powerful belief we've inherited that keeps us from having what we want. I'm Perry Gruber, the Enlightenment Guy. For over a decade, I've helped people master their mindset so they can create lives they love and get results without the burnout or the hustle. Welcome to Worthiness Wednesday. This is where I speak unscripted about client breakthroughs from the past week, and show you what's possible when you stop doubting your value. So this is important, this aspect of being wrong, and I want to relate it to you from the perspective of my own life and that of a client last week who had an experience. Actually, he has several experiences of this popping off in our sessions. We were talking last week about a relationship he has with his sister, who is also a client, and how he's often using that relationship because his sister, being a client, is much better at this practice than he is currently. He's relatively new. He relies on her to keep him positively focused, especially on a relationship that they both have with their mother, who is also a client. And so instead of leaning on the practice to enable him to have a high vibration and therefore transform that relationship with his mother, he often struggles with his own negative momentum about the subject of his mother, and then he goes over to his sister's house in order to have her support him in keeping his vibration high. That is not the best way to manage your vibration. It's better to do it from within. And so that's what we were talking about in our session this week. And while I was describing to him how leaning on his sister for vibrational support instead of leaning on his broader perspective, his own internal compass for support, is not a good thing, he started to interpret what I was sharing with him as making him wrong. Now, this is a common belief that almost every human being has when they move through physical reality, because every human being that comes into physical reality, at least up till now, comes through a vagina, which means they come through another human being, typically two human beings, a parent, a father and a mother. And when they come in to life experience that way, it is inevitable that they are going to inherit certain beliefs and draw certain conclusions from those interactions with their parents. And I would say a very common belief and then a conclusion that nearly every human being forms and then concludes is that they are wrong, especially when the parent has lost connection with their love for their child, sees something that the child is doing or something that they've said, are triggered by that, and then berate the child or reprimand the child or spank the child or just tell the child that they're doing something wrong. In that interaction, when the mother or the father is expressing anger or disapproval or displeasure with the child is perceiving that interaction, and more often than not, that child is going to make that interaction about themselves and therefore conclude that there's something wrong with them. Now, that is a dynamic that begins to create a whole lot of trouble in life later on. And the reason why is because the child knows, every child when they come into physical reality, they are more tapped into their broader perspective relationship than any adult on the planet. That's because they still have more time in non-physical reality than they do in physical reality, and so there's less distractions distracting them from their connection with their broader perspective, their inner being knowing. And so they're coming into the world rambunctious and energized and positively focused and wanting to experience the best that life has to offer. But when they draw conclusions or have an experience that causes them to draw conclusions about themselves that are divergent from what their broader perspective knows about themselves, then they experience negative emotion. We can talk about negative emotion. I'll talk about that in another Worthiness Wednesday episode, but in this one, let's just suffice it to say that that negative emotion is telling them something they really want to know. And when the parent is screaming or yelling or even spanking the child is having a dissonance that shows up as negative emotion. They're trying to figure out why they're having this experience when they know that through their connection with their broader perspective that they are freedom-seeking beings, that they are sovereign, that they are powerful creators. And so when they're having this experience, usually what happens is that the human being concludes that there's something, the human child concludes that there's something wrong with them. And when they think that, their broader perspective knows that's a bunch of bullshit. And so rather than being aligned with their broader perspective and recognizing that no, I'm a sovereign being, I'm a freedom-seeking being, and I'm here for the joy of life, they begin to conclude that there's something wrong with them. And that negative emotion that shows up is telling them that that conclusion is bogus. So, as the child grows into an adult, the more experiences they have where they're interacting with other human beings that lose their shit and get disconnected to their own broader perspective, get angry or frustrated or annoyed or disappointed with the person, when they're exhibiting that kind of behavior, the individual who is on the receiving end of that behavior, what happens within them is that they are triggered by this wrongness that they inherited from their parents. And so this client, we were talking in our session about how he is relying on support from his sister rather than gaining support from his broader perspective to enable him to maintain a high vibration. As we were talking about that, it was reminding him, the conversation was reminding him of experiences he's had with his mother where his mother made him wrong. And he has concluded, as I described a few minutes ago, he's concluded that in this conversation, in the session, that he is wrong. And so he started to have this really negative experience where he began to blame me and attack me for what he was experiencing, which was the experience of him feeling that he was wrong. This is a very powerful realization. And rather than, of course, me collapsing into that momentum and getting defensive in response, I recognized what was happening, that he was in the story, in the belief of, I'm wrong, I'm bad, and so I must lash out. And so I gently stopped the conversation on the subject of his sister supporting him in his positively focused practice, and instead redirected his attention to the possibility that he's having a triggered moment right now, a moment that is reminding him in his own physical reality, reminding him that he had these experiences in the past where he was judged by others, his mother, as being wrong, and therefore concluded that there's something bad or wrong with him. And when he had that experience as a child, his broader perspective knew that was a distortion, and so he felt the negative emotion which was trying to get him to realign with his broader perspective. And that's what was happening in this session. He was feeling that I was making him wrong. I wasn't. That was his interpretation in his reality. And as a result of feeling wrong, he disconnected himself from his broader perspective and then felt the negative emotion that is associated with being wrong. Now, everybody exists in their own individualized, personal, private physical reality. There's no one else in there but you. And so the only relationship you have in that experience is the relationship between you and your broader perspective. And your broader perspective is always seeing the experience you're having in physical reality as a positive one. And when you don't interpret that physical reality experience as positive also, you feel the dissonance between your interpretation of the experience and your broader perspective's interpretation of your experience, and the dissonance between those two interpretations is what creates the negative emotion. And the negative emotion is intended to have you alert yourself that you're having an interpretation that is not aligned with your broader perspective, and then do something about that. So this client knew about everything I just said, and so when I gently redirected his attention to the fact that in his physical reality, which was separate from my physical reality, he was creating a version of me that he could blame for the belief that was triggered within him that he's wrong and bad for leaning on his sister to maintain his higher vibration instead of leaning on his inner being and his own abilities. And so once I gently pointed that out to him, because he's in the practice, he was able to see that that's what was happening. And then he created a version of me in his physical reality that was more on his side than someone that he could blame. And the minute that happened, he lightened up, he softened, he relaxed, and then a miracle showed up. He said, "Thank you for that." Because he recognized that he had this powerful belief momentum that was causing him to create a version of me that was worthy of being attacked as he was defending himself against this idea that he was wrong and bad. An idea that was not coming from me, it was coming from him, from his old, probable past realities in which his mother had beliefs that had him, the version of him in her reality, as being wrong and bad, which is why she was triggered back then and was berating him. But in that same experience, in his version of that experience, he was interpreting himself as being bad and wrong because his mother was yelling at him. And so here that past probable reality was playing out in our session. And the moment he got clear about it, he softened, he lightened up, and then he thanked me. That same dynamic, the softening up, the lightening, and then the expression of appreciation can happen in any experience where you're having a negative experience with someone else or a circumstance or a situation. All you have to do, it's not easy, so it's not all you have to do, but if you have the practice of the positively focused practice under your belt, then it's easier to do. All you have to do is line up with what your broader perspective knows, that eternal state of being that you are, that you bring with you into physical reality, who is guiding you constantly toward everything that you're wanting. When you line back up with that, you create a probable future reality in the moment of becoming that shows up as your present moment, where you can soften and lighten and see that the people who are interacting with you are not causing you to feel any particular way. They're not making you feel any particular way. You're doing that to yourself, which means you have tremendous power to create any internal experience that you want. And when you create a positive internal experience, then your physical reality must reflect that back to you. And that's what the positively focused practice is all about. Creating an internal state of unshakable, sovereign goodness, positivity, freedom, joy-seeking energy within you. And then as you maintain that chronically, your physical reality has to reflect that back to you. And then your reality changes, your life changes, and the world gets better, but only for you. Because other people are living in their own private, personal, physical reality that is a reflection of their dominant momentum of belief. So you can't do this for others, but you can do it for you. And when you do it for you, you realize your power. AI is coming. AI is coming. There's nothing about it. There's nothing you can do about it. It's here. But it can't match your value. You're valuable for what you are, not for what you do. And if you line up with your being, who you are is powerful and valuable and eternal and unmatched.